Most railroads wouldn't have reached the size they've become today if it wasn't for several predecessor railroads that make up the present-day system in one way or another. Some railroads recognize this with the use of heritage units, which is when a modern locomotive, active on the present railroad's roster, is painted in the paint scheme of a railroad which made up part of the current railroad's trackage. For example, the New York Central Railroad has made up a massive portion of the present-day Metro-North commuter rail system. Therefore, Metro-North painted P32AC No. 211 into the New York Central's iconic two-tone gray livery in order to pay tribute to said railroad. Heritage units are often made to represent a special event, such as the anniversary of the current railroad, as is the case for New Jersey Transit, as they released several heritage coaches and 3 heritage locomotives for their 40th anniversary in 2019, followed by several more engines in the following year. Interestingly enough, one of the 3 original heritage units just so happened to be from the same railroad it was given heritage livery for. Likewise, it's also uncommon for a locomotive to be repainted back into the livery of its former railroad, and even more so for it to be in service on the home trackage of the railroad it's representing, while sporting said railroad's livery. All these circumstances are what makes the story of this locomotive the perfect one-in-a-million chance, as all these features perfectly describe the history of New Jersey Transit number 4109. It was the 1960s, and railroads across the nation were losing money due to the increasing competition from road and air travel. Because of this, railroads were always looking for ways to cut costs and buy low, as they prioritized practical, do-it-all designs that were easy to maintain. With this in mind, Electromotive Diesel, or EMD, produced the ever-so iconic GP40, with GP standing for General Purpose and 40 standing for Model 40. This model proved to be one of the most successful road switchers of its time, as this flexible 4-axle road switcher could be used for a wide variety of local and long-distance freights, with over 1,000 examples being built for various railroads across the country. Now, despite the emphasis on freight rail at the time, it was soon realized that the low-cost and versatile design of the GP40 could also be useful for passenger services. The Central Railroad in New Jersey was the first to place an order for a passenger variant of the GP40, as these locomotives were designated as the GP40P, with the P standing for the passenger variant of the locomotive. A total of just 12 GP40Ps were built in 1968 and were placed on longer frames than the standard GP40 to accommodate a steam generator, as the GP40Ps produce the same 3,000 horsepower from the EMD 645 E3 16-cylinder prime mover. They are used on the CNJ's main line for service between Newark Penn Station and Phillipsburg, New Jersey, also known as the Raritan Valley Line, and the North Jersey Coast Line between Newark and Bay Head, New Jersey, in cooperation with Penn Central at the time. Like a few other commuter services, these locomotives were funded through a grant provided by the New Jersey Department of Transportation, or NJT, who ran the commuter services within the New Jersey to New York City area. But unlike most commuter services, these engines were also partially financed by the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, one of the owners of the CNJ at the time, since these engines were given an almost identical paint scheme to the current B&O blue and gold, so that in the event that passenger service ceased operations, the engines could easily be converted for freight service, as this pessimistic outlook on passenger services as a whole was a common design aspect of new passenger engines at the time. CNJ assigned the GP40Ps number 3671 and 3683, with the locomotive to be focused on being number 3677, which was built in the middle of the batch in October 1968. This locomotive served the CNJ and New Jersey well into the 70s, as it ran both long hood and short hood forward, along with a diverse fleet of older CNJ commuter coaches and observation cars dating back to the 1920s, as well as former long-distance coaches from railroads such as the Great Northern, thus earning this service the nickname the Jersey Builder. Some of these passenger trains even saw observation cars on one or both ends of the train, thus giving this locomotive the honor of being one of the last commuter rail services in North America to use observation cars in revenue service. A few years after being delivered, the GP40s were given yellow safety stripes at the front, with 3677 getting these stripes around 1974. In order to consolidate the then bankrupt Northeastern railroads, including the CNJ, the United States government created Consolidated Rail Corporation, or Conrail, in 1976 to take over these railroads in order to boost their profit and keep the struggling railroads afloat. After the merger, Carmel operated the New Jersey commuter services along with NJT, as the GP40s were later renumbered to 4100 4112 in 1977, with 3677 being renumbered to 4106. As a side note, most NJT GP40Ps were repainted into the official NJT Bluebird livery, such as engine 4101, which was covered in the previous episode, but 4106 was never repainted into this paint scheme. Instead, in 1977, the words Led Zepp were painted on the side of 4106, paying tribute to the famous rock band Led Zeppelin. This was fittingly spotted the same year when the band was on tour in North America. But through good times and bad times, the freight routes have had their share, and they ultimately wanted to run freight trains, as Conrail announced in 1981 that they would no longer be operating money-losing commuter rail services in the Northeast. Not to be left dazed and confused, this in turn resulted in several state agencies stepping in and creating their own commuter railroads to formally take over these commuter services, as NJT officially established New Jersey Transit's rail operations to formally take over commuter rail routes in 1983, and most of its existing rolling stock was repainted into the NJT disco stripe livery in the early 1980s. 4106 was no exception, as this engine, along with other CNJ GP40s, was repainted as they served the newly formed New Jersey Transit rail system. Starting in 1991, NJ Transit began a rebuild program with Conrail focusing on their ex-CNJ GP40Ps, along with converting other GP40s recently purchased from CSX and Conrail to replace the aging GEU 34CH. These upgrades included a complete rebuild from the frame to the roof, which included upgraded electronics to Dash 2 standards, and the addition of a diesel head-end power generator powered by Caterpillar, the latter of which was the most notable differences towards the rear. Additionally, the Jeeps were fitted with new 2,000-gallon fuel tanks, a new rear anti-climber added at the end of the long hood, a new air start, and brakes changed from class to single chute. These rebuilds were designated the GP40PH-2, with the H standing for head-end power, and the Dash 2 meaning it has been rebuilt, as these engines were numbered between 4100 to 4112. After this rebuild of the Jeeps, 4106 was renumbered to 4109, as all the CNJ GP40s were given different numbers within the 4100 to 4112 range, with the exception of 4101. Quick side note, it's important to highlight this brief renumbering for the Jeeps, otherwise this would have happened in the script. 4109 had quite the tendency to be associated with celebrity entrants in places, as there's even a picture of 4109 next to NJT number 4876, the same GG1 which was involved in the Federal Express incident at Washington, D.C. Union Station in 1953, and is currently preserved at the Baltimore Railroad Museum. 4109 was even coupled to a steam excursion star once, that being Nickel Plate Road number 765, when it visited New Jersey for excursions in 1988. 2 years later, it led a ski train on former Lehigh and Hudson River Railroad trackage to Virden, New Jersey, operated by NJT and the Susquehanna Railroad, with the destination being the ski resort of the infamous Action Park. But not too long after these noteworthy cameos, 4109 will be involved in a rebuild program with the other CNJ GP40s, in addition to recently acquired Conrail and CSX GP40s. These newly rebuilt engines were reclassified as GP40PH-2s, and in turn were also renumbered, as 4109 was renumbered to 4107. These slightly renumbered and rebuilt GP40s soon re-entered service for NJT and served on their diesel lines from Hoboken to all points west within the system, with 4109 also being used for the NYS&W TNHS Easter Bunny excursion in 2008. But starting in 2014, nearly all of NJ Transit's original GP40PH-2s entered an in-house rebuild program by NJ Transit for a mechanical conversion into a standard GP40-2 for non-revenue work train service. The HEP motor was removed, unlit number boards were drilled in, the rear ladders were removed and replaced with steps, and LED markers were applied to the rear end of the locomotive, replacing their original tricolor class lights. With the only two exceptions for this rebuild being 4100 and 4101, NJT 4109 was converted into a work engine, where it served as a lead engine for maintenance trains and equipment moves alike throughout the system. It looked as if this engine's fate on NJ Transit was sealed, as it was demoted to work train service just 20 years after being rebuilt. But the railroad luckily had other plans for the engine. In 2019, a few years after the rebuild, New Jersey Transit was celebrating the 40th anniversary of their formation, and in order to celebrate this occasion, NJT selected 5 Bombardier multi-level coaches and 1 cab car to be wrapped in one of 6 different railroads which make up the present-day NJT system. These 6 wraps represent the Pennsylvania Railroad, Erie-Lackawanna, Conrail, NJDOT, Pennsylvania Reading Seashore Lines, and CNJ. But NJT wasn't done with their big 40-year anniversary celebration just yet. It's just a few months after wrapping the coaches, NJT selected 3 locomotives to be given heritage wraps, thus creating the railroad's first heritage units, and by extension, the first commuter railroad heritage units since Metro North's Condot New Haven engines in 2001. The lucky 3 locomotives chosen were ALP 46 number 4636, representing the Pennsylvania Railroad, ALP 45 number 4519, representing the Erie-Lackawanna, and the then stored GP40PH-2 number 4109, representing the Central Railroad of New Jersey. Since 4109 was an ex-CNJ GP40, it would only be appropriate to repaint the locomotive into its original as-built CNJ livery, as on October 5, 2019, 3 heritage units emerged from the railroad's Meadowlands complex along with other locomotives for the NJT Family Days events. What makes the case for 4109 specifically unique is that the GP40 was then reconverted back to a GP40PH-2 in order to pull passenger trains again, as it was also given positive train control, or PTC, in addition to gaining its HEP motor back. After additional work on the locomotive, 4109 started testing on November 20th and re-entered revenue service on December 3rd, 2019, and was almost immediately placed into excursion service as it led the Railmen for Children train on December 6th along the Montclair Routes line to Port Morris. Other notable events that 4109 has been to since then include the last run of engineer Frank Strunk on the Raritan Valley line in July 2021, the 2022 URHS Boot and Rail Museum for a day, the 2022 NJT Santa Train, the 2023 Hoboken Rail Fest to celebrate the 40th anniversary of NJT's rail operations, and the 2024 Whitney Railway Museum Open House, as 4109 became one of a handful of heritage unit Jeeps that were used by NJT and nearby railway museums for a series of special events. Since then, 4109 has been spotted in regular service on NJT's diesel routes, including their ex-Lackawanna, ex-Erie, and ex-CNJ routes. As this locomotive continues to serve NJT on local trains and make rail fans go nuts over catching a heritage unit, 4109 not only represents one of the achievements of NJT for their 40th anniversary, but it also represents how a locomotive can be repainted back into its original livery and can be rebuilt and go back into revenue service, something which is nearly unheard of in railroading history. Thank you all for watching this episode of Remarkable Engines. The circumstances which 4109 was in makes its story a truly unique and remarkable one, as it was not only reactivated for passenger service after years of maintenance work, but it was simultaneously repainted into its original livery and ran on the home trackage of its original owner. The EMD GP40P is already a rare variant of the successful and widely used GP40 that could only be found along CNJ trackage, which makes it a miracle that this engine is still serving its intended purpose of running passenger trains almost 60 years after being built. The fate of 4109 prior to the rebuild was looking grim, as this locomotive and others in its class were converted for work service and were unlikely to ever pull a passenger train ever again, and could possibly be retired and scrapped. With this locomotive, an ex-CNJ GP40P, being repainted back into its as-built CNJ livery and working on ex-CNJ trackage makes the story of this engine truly remarkable. Thank you again for watching. Credit for all the photos used go to their respective photographers, and if you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Have a good day.